Welcome to the Pastor and Priestess podcast. I'm the pastor, JT.
And I'm the priestess, Allison.
We're excited today to have Lettie Sullivan with us. We're going to have a conversation about social justice and spirituality, how they are interdependent, what the future of the social justice movement might be, and how sacred union can contribute. Welcome, Lettie Sullivan. So glad to have you here.
I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I want to tell our audience just a brief bit about Lettie. Lettie is a priestess of the sacred arts and the creatrix of the goddess ministry, whose mission is to anchor energetic activism centered in love, divine feminine wisdom, metaphysical principles, and cosmic time cycles. I love the incredible sweep of that and how it comes right down to being centered in love. Anchor energetic activism. Love that. In 2020, as the Black Lives Matter protests raged and George Floyd's murder activated many people into the conversation about social justice, Lettie catalyzed the birth of an online community space aimed at creating a renaissance in cultural intelligence. And now the real work begins, as she says, to articulate and craft new cultural forms. Wonderful. We want to continue that very conversation here and now. I was impacted by that online space that you held. I remember seeing how big your heart was, the strength of it, being willing to just step right into the grief, that river of grief, and that's where we needed to be. So thank you for leading in that moment. Yeah. And in that moment, we were thinking about having this moment. We want to be engaged more and have this conversation.
Well, it's funny because right before you launched that Eclipsing Injustice space and invited people to feel the grief and to pray together around it, just a couple days before that, I had never met you, didn't know who you were, never heard your name. And I was praying in ceremony with another priestess sister, Anahita, and we were in ceremony together, and we were wailing and crying about George Floyd and really just processing our own grief about it. And I remember getting on my knees and calling out for you, for you. I was like, where are the Black priestess sisters? Where are they? We need them so much right now. And it was like it was almost like I conjured you, the calling out for where are you in ceremony. And then the next morning I saw a Facebook post with you in it announcing your session on Eclipsing Injustice. So we both attended. We were so, as he said, we're so moved by your work in the world, and you're bringing your heart so forward with your gifts. Thank you for being here.
Much. Yeah, I just, I feel a little teary because it was really just that moment of surrender, at that moment where I surrendered to the grief in public. We tend to grieve privately. It's something that we don't see as a Black-bodied woman. We are expected to be strong, to really put the world on our shoulders. And it's interesting what you say about, where are the Black priestesses? I've been holding circles for a decade. and I always had these small groups, even in that lunar cycle. It was, Eclipsing Injustice was on the full moon of June 5th of 2020. On the new moon of that cycle, I had 13 women in a circle. And I think up to that point, the largest circle I ever held was probably about, on my own, maybe 50. But I went in that cycle from 13 to about 1,300
Mhm.
within the span of a week.
Mhm.
And it was just, and then so many, and able to galvanize my other sisters,
Mhm.
who were anchoring and holding just much smaller spaces. And so one of the gifts that came from that tragedy is that we all started to cross pollinate. We all started
Mhm.
to cry together and to grieve together and to rage together in a spiritually constructive way. um, and that's led to many conversations, whether it was in families, in workplaces, and in communities. There was just more openness and witnessing and sharing as a result. And so, while some of the momentum died down, what we get to talk about today is, how are we constructing a just society?
Yeah.
How are we infusing justice back into
Mhm.
the way we do things?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it was so potent. As I said, I was one of those who grieved in private, and I was grieving in private in ceremony. And then you called me into this public ceremony, and it was so potent for me to be there with all of those women and men who showed up. Yeah, so potent. So tell me how you got there, a little bit of your personal story. I've heard you talk before about how in this social justice movement, we all have a unique role to play. We don't all have to be out there on the streets marching. And in fact, you chose not to be out on the streets marching last summer. You knew you had your own unique role to play. So tell me a little bit about how you got there and about this notion of, how do we find our lane? What's the lane that we're supposed to play in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, I grew up in, I was born here in Chicago. This is where I live now. But I grew up in Atlanta, and that was the cradle of the civil rights movement, so part of just my whole upbringing in that space was about how our ancestors and our elders fought to give us the opportunity to vote and to participate in society, right? And to make our voice known. So it was almost like, how dare you not vote? How
Mm.
dare you not lend your voice, when so many of us, at the time, there were so many more alive back then than there are now, but so many of us put our lives on the line to give you this opportunity. And so that was taught by our teachers, the faculty, and everyone at our, in my education. So it was instilled in me. I was raised in the church. My mother was a minister. She was an evangelist, more specifically identified as an evangelist. She had a prison ministry. She had many ministries. I'll put it that way. She was helping the elderly. She was helping with children. She was helping with prisoners, and the sick and the shut in, right? And so that was the example. And being the youngest child, I spent more time with her because my siblings were almost a decade older than me. So by the time I was 10, it was just me and mom. And so I was her sidekick, in so much of her ministry work. And so that's kind of where I cut my teeth. Unfortunately, when I did start to take my priestess path, it put us in contention. um
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm.
she was like, "Oh no, you're practicing witchcraft." And well,
Sure, Mom, I am.
I guess I am. But it was soul nourishing to me, and it was actually bringing my lineage forward, because her mother was still practicing traditional African spirituality, and it was my mother who turned away from the tradition to embrace Christianity. And so it was almost like, you're taking her side. um, but
Mhm.
it's all the same stuff. What my mother called, prophet, the gift of prophecy, was just my intuition and my clairvoyance. What they called laying on hands and faith healing was, just the same, you know abilities coming through. So in a lot of ways, it was like, well, I got this from you. So this is your doing, woman. But we made our peace, though. She did acknowledge me as a woman of God before she made her transition, and that was so fulfilling. And so I had my own ministry, and I was just very content with small circles, and just supporting people knee to knee, eye to eye, without really needing a whole lot of institutional support. Even though I did go into ministerial training and I did get a license from the Centers for Spiritual Living. And, so I'm a science of mind practitioner. And I studied with the Four Winds Society and shamanism. So Dr. Alberto Villoldo was one of my teachers, and so, I was already deeply, doing this work. And so at the time that everything was going on during the pandemic and last year, I knew I wasn't going to go protest during a pandemic. It wasn't, but I had gone to DC for the Women's March. I had did the Women's March the following year here in Chicago, which was another massive demonstration. So I was no stranger to showing up for something rather than against something. And that's where I put my energy, wherever it was needed, and just holding it all in prayer, as always. But when everything went down with George Floyd, I knew that wasn't the path, and I went into prayer. And an interesting thing about that story of how we got to the June 5th ritual was that I didn't have a whole lot of time to ruminate about what had happened to Mr. Floyd, because uh, my best friend from college needed this surgery that was going to leave her incapacitated, and it got canceled because of the pandemic. And so we had scheduled that weekend, or that time, for she was going to get her surgery, and I was supposed to spend the night with her, to be that person caring for her. And she's a white-bodied woman. And so while the world is raging and there's this seeming clash between black and white and race and all this stuff, I'm feeding her, I'm helping her to the toilet, I'm washing her in the bathtub, I'm caring and loving on this woman that, that means so much to me. She's my children's godmother, and she's one of the strongest people I know. And she was at her weakest point. And so I couldn't get wrapped up in a skin issue, in a, like I couldn't be like, oh, white people this and white people that. That wasn't my experience, even though I know so many people of color that were really raging about that in that direction. For me, this was about all of us. All of us were harmed in a way. And that's why so many people were activated. There was this huge outpouring of grief. And so, in being there and loving and caring for my friend, the thing that was really clear is that this is not about skin right now. This is about humanity. This is about all of us. And I prayed to God, what is mine to do? Because I'm not going out there. I'm not going out. And especially here in Chicago, it was quite violent, and on the streets. And so it said, hold, all my higher self said was hold space, and I knew the moon was coming up. I was going to have a circle. I, talked to my community, and they were like, let's roll. They were like, let's do it. And I was just floored. It was like 24 hours and just hundreds and hundreds of people. And throughout the whole week, hundreds and hundreds of people. It was just what was needed. And when I said, God, use me, that's what I got. And that's why I'm here.
Well, it's very, hearing you talk about that really touched my heart, brought some tears to my eyes. And it's clear to me why God would say yes to that request to use you. Beautiful instrument that you are.
Wonderful. Lettie, let's continue with that thread and go a little deeper. Let's talk about sacred activism. Sort of what forms does it take? How do you get there? You know, the eclipsing injustice space was one important one. I love that phrase about anchoring energetically, you know, the work. So what comes to mind for you? What are your signposts, your marking posts, if you will? How do you know the activism is sacred? How do you navigate that? How do you feel into it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything is energy, right? Like we are energy incarnate. And what does incarnate mean? It means in meat.
Mm-hmm.
So we are energy in these meat suits. And
Meat
everything that
suits.
we're doing, I know. And it's like sometimes we forget, like, we are spirit, right? We can hook ourselves up to machines and see the energy moving about, whether it's biofeedback, EKG, EEG, whatever it is. We are energy beings. Now, the ancients, they talked about this all the time. But it got lost, it through colonization and the patriarchy kind of grabbing hold of the church and saying that this is no longer a maternal institution, that women are not holy, that only men are made in the image of the Father and not women. So there's that breakdown energetically, of that hard separation between the masculine and the feminine, with the demotion of the feminine and the ascension of the masculine being very, constructed in that way. And that's a whole energetic construct, right?
Right.
And
And it's not true.
well, no, and it's not
It's
true.
built on lies.
It's built on lies, and it was
Mhm.
enforced by violence, incredible violence. What is violence? Violence is energy, right? So we forget that everything is inside of everything else, right? Have you ever walked into a room and two people might have been arguing and then they stop? You didn't hear the argument, but you feel the energy, don't you? Right? There's all these ways, these subtle ways that we've lost the interpretation of everything going on around us, right? So when energetic activism came forward in my meditation, as I was saying, what is it? Okay, now what is it you want me to do? Holy Spirit, like, how am I doing this thing? And to find the words to encapsulate this energy, it was really about, how do we dismantle the system without violence? And when you really understand that our society and our cultures are constructed by agreement, right? Agreement has a very different energy than disagreement, right? When somebody disagrees with you, sometimes they don't have to say they disagree. You can just see it, you can feel it. It's like it pulls back. There's like a constriction, or, so our culture is based on agreement, right? If you want to look at an agreement field that changed in the last decade, look at medical cannabis. Look at what's happening with cannabis in the world. It was a hard no. It was this is just as bad as heroin, and this is just as bad as cocaine and all this other stuff. Whereas there was the understanding of indigenous peoples and the nature of the plant and the healing properties of the plant, and then the scientific backing that says we actually have receptors exactly for these things that this plant holds, right? So this is something that earth gives us, right? So that shifted till now it's legal, and we still have people locked up, for the rest of their lives, but that's another story. But the energy of collective consent, right? That is at the heart of energetic activism. That collective consent piece. We know that it can happen. We know that it can happen rapidly, right? Look at what happened with George Floyd's murder. Everybody was activated now, energetically activated from those
Yeah.
images.
And saying we don't consent to that.
You don't consent. And so what's happening, there are conversations happening now that were not happening prior to that incident. And I personally feel like it is a worthy endeavor to honor that man's life, regardless of what he did, because everybody want to talk about his past and his crimes and his addiction and all this other stuff. But how can you look at his little daughter and say that that man's life didn't matter? You know, again, all of this is energy. And so that's where the work is.
Mhm.
Where we do the work.
Yeah, changing the energy patterns, changing consent. Beautiful.
Mhm. And so, how does that? I have this sense that the energetic activism and which is sort of more in the unseen realm,
Mhm.
right? It's in the energetic realm. How does that play together with the more visible forms of activism? How do they find each other in a sacred union? My hunch is that they go together, that they belong together somehow.
Well, for sure. I mean, and well, that's the thing. Do you think about, for everybody, think about a time where you made up your mind and it wasn't going to change? One thing that comes to mind for me was I realized I was done with this job. Like I knew that I knew that I could not work for that organization again. I was done. And when I got to that point where I was just like, you know what, I am going to find another job. This is not a match. This is not a fit. I'm done. Then I showed up and gave my notice. Then I went to the computer and looked for another job and interviewed and took action. So usually the thought, you know, the conviction precedes the action. And so that's what this is. So once we get to a point where we're like, we are done with this construction of society, right? And we're already there. This is the magic of the moment that we need to realize, is that we have to rebuild anyway. Because society as we know it, there are so many things that we're just not going to go back to. It's just not going to be that way ever again. You know? And so we already have to rebuild and reconstruct things and reconfigure things, right?
And we're
And
not done with the dismantling. We still have a lot
we're
more
done with the dismantling.
dismantling.
No,
Yeah.
because as things fall away, they reveal more. Oh, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't work either. You know, oh, that doesn't work either. And so, you know, 2020, I remember doing a vision board for 2020, and we were like, 2020 vision. Oh, we're going to see clearly and all this other stuff. And we sure did. Many of us didn't like what we saw. And now in 2021, we're like, oh, well, hindsight is 2020. Now we're looking back to see even more, right? Of
what we got to see.
patterns that were revealed. We got to see patterns. That's why we can have a conversation about systemic racism, because you can tell the difference between what happened that summer after George Floyd's murder and what happened on January 6th with the riot. Police,
Yeah.
they were saying, oh, police, you know, they shoot people because they're, you know, the adrenaline and the job and the this, that, and the other. And yet we saw police be able to show constraint. They weren't just shooting those rioters at the Capitol. So we know that they actually can have restraint in the face of threat. So then we got to really act. I mean, you people can spin it any kind of way, but you can see that the stark contrast between what happened in the summer of 2020 and what happened on January 6th at the Capitol.
Yeah. So many people can see that more clearly now because of those events. So as much as we might lament those events, wish they didn't happen, in a sense, you could tell the story that they happened for our own good.
Well, I mean, you know, the interesting thing again with the hindsight is that we can create our meaning after the fact. So, you start to create these different things, but um, ultimately we're always at that place of, well, what do we do now? Every time there's a flare up of injustice in the world and chaos, what is the reconciliation? What is the resolution to this chaos? It's justice.
Yes, indeed.
It's justice.
Yeah, it's that Cornell West quote, justice is what love looks like in public.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
that's this energy. I love that you've been called a love warrior,
Yep.
and that there's a kind of love energy that has to feed this. One of my heroes in American life and American history is Fannie Lou Hamer,
Mm.
because Fannie, as that song leader, wasn't just a song leader. She was just a leader.
Can you tell the story about her for people who don't know it?
Well, look on Google, Fannie Lou Hamer, Hamer, and I'll let Google show you the articles. But Fannie Lou was a Mississippi sharecropper who basically had had enough. She eventually said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." And so she brought her powerful voice and laid her brown body on the line all the time, again and again, in the 60s and even in the 70s. Incredible soul. And I think that's why Fannie Lou is such a hero to me, is because she understood, um, almost like the manifestation of that earth wisdom. It's like her feet were on the ground, and from that right up through her throat and in her speech and singing, she knew that the movement needed spirit, it needed soul, it needed energy to keep going, and the people need that energy to keep going in the face of what was and what is. And so I think about that a lot when I think about how does our love get manifested in the social arena, in the cultural arena, but also how does it keep going? How is it fed? How does this long arc, which is a sacred union, the energy and the manifestation, how do we continue, even rediscover what many elders, powerful elders like Fannie Lou Hamer have known, that these two are part of the same thing.
That's right.
What's the art of keeping that cycle alive? And I see that in your work. That's why we're so excited to have you come and share, and why we look forward to more. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was her lesson, is to raise your voice,
Hmm.
right? One of the things, I had the honor and the privilege to travel to Egypt in the fall of 2019 and to go and sing the temples awake. And we were given access to the holies of holies and many places that were restricted to the public, to go, from the south of Aswan all the way up and sail up the Nile and stop at temples and sing in them. And what the ancients knew was that those frequencies of sound impact our energy, our human bodies, right? Have you ever seen water? Like, there's a sound practitioner I follow online, and she just did a video. I watched it last night, and she had a bowl of water inside of her singing bowl, and she was toning it, and it was creating these beautiful ripples and waves. And so when you think about our body temples being made of mostly water, then the
Hmm.
sound is impacting us. And then when you get a group of people together, singing together, chanting together, the energy, we all get caught up in that, right? And there's all kinds of scientific words and all kinds of things we can talk about and point to nature and say this happens, but we have circuitry inside of us that responds to sound. And so, what is being revealed now, as we are having almost like this sacred union between science and spirituality, is that, it is for us to be raising our voices, right? So, even when we're speaking, we are, creating sound waves. We have, I have a specific tone, JT, you have a soothing tone to your voice, like we all have this. And so it is the frequency that we are emitting, right? Whether it's in song, I'm feeling very calm and peaceful in this moment. But when I get upset or anxious, it's a whole different tone. And if I'm upset and frustrated and angry, you're gonna feel that energy. You're gonna feel that tone. It's gonna impact you, right? So this is, we are all affecting each other. And so our choice of words, the words that we're using, I think back to something that I think this was Jesus's Sermon on the Mount. And he was talking about spiritual warfare, you know spiritual wickedness in high places, and he was talking about putting on the whole armor of God. You remember that? I know you know this, JT, right? But the we are in something called more of a narrative warfare. So what's happening is that there isn't a kinetic war anymore as far as just shooting bullets, right? That's kind of going by the wayside. But what we're experiencing in the collective is this narrative warfare where words are being twisted to mean something different. And so if you're not tuned into the quality of the word being used, for example, love warrior. Use love warrior because for me, if you see an image of me holding a sword, that's the sword of truth. And my sword of truth is centered on love. It's not meant to cut down an individual in violence. It is to cut away the illusion so that we can see clearly, right? But then someone, proposing or espousing, certain beliefs that are very destructive to humanity is also using love warrior. So we're finding now a co-opting of language, which to me is a form of warfare. So now we have to choose our words because words matter,
And the energy beneath the words matters even more.
Even more.
It's the
right?
two of them together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you can't step over that. There's a way that someone says something, but their intent is the complete opposite. And we see that coming all the way from the top, from government, like let's say No Child Left Behind left so many children behind. you know all of these different things. The CARES Act didn't really care about people enough to give them what they needed to survive the pandemic. I mean, all kinds of things. So words matter.
And also the tone, you're talking about the tone matters, and all that is that's the sort of the outgoing, where it's coming from. But also that requires us, don't you think, Lettie? This goes back to your frame around energetic activism. So as energetic activists, we've got to have good discernment. We've got to be able to tell the difference and to pull out this sort of truth and cut away those lies and those illusions. But we can't do that if we can't even see them or discern the difference between a lie and a truth.
That's right. And so what's been happening in my communities is that, and with the way Eclipsing Injustice has evolved and continues to evolve, is that we need new language. B, we need to be clear what we're up to here. Are we still going back and looking at how did we get here, or are we like, okay, what are we building? Because that's the place where we are now. Is that, Bucky Fuller has this great quote. I should just put a post-it on here because I love it so much. And he basically says, you don't change something, you build something that makes the current thing obsolete.
Yes.
Right? That's where the change comes in. So we have been fighting, quote unquote, social justice warriors have been fighting the system in a particular way for decades, for generations. And the imperative of the moment is, what are we building? Because many things have to be rebuilt anyway. So what are we building now to make that old system obsolete? And that is the conversations we need to have, and the language and the processes and all of that is already available. They're already available. So now it's a matter of, how are we treating each other? How are we listening to each other? How are we speaking to each other? Right? And to me, the work that we're doing is, calling everything into question, naming things that maybe haven't been named before. One of my teachers, Res Mamenicum, he wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands, and he
Mhm.
talks about how he talks about the trauma. And right now we're having this huge reckoning with the trauma that we all had. I mean, George Floyd's murder was a huge trauma trigger. And I'm not someone who experiences rage all that much. I mean, it takes a whole lot to get me there because I'm usually pretty zen, right? But the rage that was activated in me was the rage of my ancestors. It was in my DNA. I mean, watching his life get snuffed out was like watching someone dear to me that I loved being killed. And that made me think about every Black mother who's ever had to face their child being killed by the police, going even back further to, slavery and all of that. Like, all of that transference happened. We forget that, when trauma happens, it's a chemical thing. It is the cortisol and the norepinephrine and all the scientific words, but all those chemicals are washing through the body. So what happened to my grandmother? The eggs of my mother were in her, and and then my mother, and it's just like all of those chemicals go into the programming. That's just how we're designed. So we're in this opportunity that you're not just stuck with, oh, just believe this mystical text that was written thousands of years ago that may have been mistranslated over and over again and taken out of context because we don't understand the culture in which it was written. It's like, you don't just have a choice to just blindly believe something. You also you don't just have to be stuck with the material universe the way the scientists give us, to just say the only thing that matters are the things that we can see, right? And so there's this merging of the seen and the unseen that we get to do now, and that we have to do, and that we have to go back and reevaluate what we were taught, because everything that we were taught is what's gotten us here. So there's a reconciliation that has to happen. There's a purging and a cleansing that has to happen, because our ancestors left us unfinished business. And we are now equipped to handle that business. It's uncomfortable though. You might have to cry some tears. You might have to have some tough conversations.
Yeah.
But we're
Yeah, as you said, I think earlier, that now the real work begins. And the real work, I think what I'm hearing you say is, the real work is to use the words of Brooke McNamara, another one of our podcast guests, to summon the unseen, and to use it to shift the culture, not just the behaviors, not just the policies, not just, whether or not police officers have war machines in their arsenal. I mean, that's one thing. That's in the tangible realm. But what I'm hearing you say is, we have to work in the intangible realm as well, energetically, to shift the culture, to shift our belief systems, to shift the way we see things and the way we talk about things.
Yep. And our technology actually makes that easier. And the fact that we've been separated from each other in the way that we have all over the world has given us the opportunity to connect in conversation, in tone, in sound together,
Yeah.
right? Even though we can't physically be together. And so this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to do things. And, it's amazing how quickly things can go viral. It's interesting to know that there are whole industries that, are working to kind of hack into what makes something viral or not. And I just say, it's time for love to go viral because love conquers all.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
That is the ancient wisdom, isn't it?
That's
Time for
right.
love to go
Yeah, we've
viral.
moved right into, what's next, the real work of articulating, crafting new cultural forms. I'm wondering what you think sacred union contributes, like to connect those words to your work and the particular aspects that need union, that which has been torn asunder. One of my definitions of violence is that which tears asunder,
Mm.
tears apart.
Oh my goodness. Well, I
Mhm.
mean, think about, you know, you hear these statistics about divorce. And, over the last couple of decades, they've been talking about what percentages of marriages end in divorce. So, statistically speaking, sacred union is something that's pretty rare for people, to see um, two humans on one accord, right?
Mm.
And in that. And if it, and then, the culture was so sick and toxic with the silence and the abuse and all the traumas that were there, that many people, didn't have access to a sacred union within themselves. You got women who were, devalued inside of this culture, paid less, the statistics about domestic violence and all of this thing. So you get this devaluing of women. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard women that, once they discovered that women were just devalued, like especially if they had brothers or family systems that elevated the male children and devalued the women, and things like that. Like, there's you know women that were affirmed for being more masculine, socialized to be more masculine, and to suppress their own feminine nature. And then, of course, then you get the toxic programming of boys don't cry, that gave men, cut men off from the access to their emotions and their own sacred waters, right? That they were affirmed for violence and affirmed for being disconnected from their emotions. And that was what sacred union resolves, that men have to go back and reclaim their wholeness, to be their whole selves, that they get depressed, they get hurt, they're riddled with uncertainties and fears, and that's okay, and they can work through it, and they can get therapy and improve the quality of their lives by integrating their spirit, these invisible things, right? Because you can go
Mhm.
out there and make all the money and elevate your status and power and influence and all of that, and still be that broken 12-year-old boy who was raped or bullied or just, badgered and harmed by the other men in their family. And it doesn't matter what your external material things are, if you don't go back to that boy and let him know that you love him, right? And for the women, it's like, you know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
Mhm.
there's so much trauma to be healed. And
Yes.
then we're in this collective conversation, this collective experience in the world that is traumatizing. We are literally walking through the valley of the shadow of death with this
Mhm.
plague.
Mhm.
And it's easy to forget that, but the anxiety and the fear is real. And we've got to do something about that. And there's going to be a huge reckoning once we this thing calms down, like, viruses and pandemics do. They do calm down. The plague ended, the Ebola ended. At some point we're going to be on the other side of this thing, and we've got a whole group of medical professionals who have been traumatized by watching people die every day, all day, for hours and hours and hours. So we've got work to do. We've got to deal with the emotion. And that means women who were told they couldn't cry, or gaslit into saying they were hysterical just because they were processing their emotions, and all the toxic ways that women have been duped out of their own emotions and their spirituality and their wholeness. We got work to do.
Mhm.
We do it in language. We do it together. We do it in ceremony. We do it around fire. We do it with food and water. We do it in nature. We do it with hugs. We do it with tears. But we got to do it.
Yes, sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know you've been doing it for a lot of years.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Thank you deeply
Blessing
for
your
service.
ministry. I think I'm sensing that we'd like to offer our listeners a taste of that ministry in another way. We've already been hearing it, the words you've been speaking, the passion that you're bringing that all to presence in this time. But we'd love for you to lead us in a prayer of activation.
Yes, yes, yes. I'd be more than happy to. So let's get in our seat. I invite you to find a neutral spine. So sit up on your sit bones and just change your posture. You want to make sure that you're not collapsing down, but that you're sitting up, but you're not propping yourself up either. You're just in that space where you feel yourself fluid. You might even want to rock back and forth a little bit because that's soothing to our nervous system, right? Because we're talking about these things and they they're not safe topics. This is not a safe topic. This is not soothing, right? So let's just be here now with everything that's been said, with the energy that we've stirred up with these words, right? We're back to the energy. Have you had an aha moment? Have you never thought of it a certain way before? Just get in tune with that. And I invite you where you are to place your hand on your heart. When you do that, you bring your awareness to that place in your body. And so right now in this moment, I want you to activate your heart just by touching. The power of touch, your own. And if you so choose, imagine from the center of your palm that you're sending a little electrical current into your heart, that you are harmonizing right now and settling. Let's take a deep breath together. So let's drop down into your heart space. And so what is it? What is it that your heart is saying in this moment? Right now, I want you to remember that your heart is a healing presence, that it emanates, it's a vibrational frequency of healing, wholeness. Can you feel that? Take a deep breath. When we feel for another, it's empathy. It's being open and receptive. I invite you to have a deep empathy for humanity, for each and every one of us incarnate in this moment. Can you feel the empathy? Take a deep breath. Can you accept that we cannot change the past? That there is work to be done now that is finishing up our ancestors' unfinished business, and that they were not equipped to do it the way we are now. Now we have language, we have therapy, we have scientific backup. We have all sorts of things that our grandparents didn't have, even if they're still here. God bless those that are able to do the work as septuagenarians and octogenarians. God bless our grandparents, that we bring this objective sense to what must be done, to discernment, discerning what is real. And let's just breathe together. Are you willing to stand resolute, to withdraw your consent from the status quo, to withdraw your consent from everything that got us here? Whether you know the details or not is irrelevant in this moment. Do you want to continue the way we have been? I say no. So stand resolute in your regard for yourself, for this planet, for humanity, for your vision, for a vision of a society, a just society. Let's breathe. What is there to transmute? Because that's the work. When we say we're finishing our ancestors' unfinished business, that means that we are transmuting and transforming from within. That the work that we're doing, that energetic activism, is an inside out job. We've got so many pithy quotes about being the change you want to see in the world, and it starts with the person in the mirror. But hey, do you really believe that? Are you willing to put skin in the game? It's time. It's time to release all of the old conditioning and patterns, because it prepared you for a world that no longer is. And we're not going back. Are you done? That's what we're withdrawing our consent from. So bring up something that you're done with and say out loud, I withdraw my consent from fill in the blank. Look at your relationships. Look at your work. Look at your environment. Look at your government. Look at culture. Look at social media. Look at the news. It's a great exercise. Look at the news. If it bleeds, it leads. I withdraw my consent from the paradigm that puts the bad news first. I withdraw my consent from algorithms that elevate hatred. I withdraw my consent from companies that undermine social justice causes and instruction and awareness. I withdraw my consent from corporations that destroy the planet. I withdraw my consent from memes that pit one group against another. What's yours? What are you withdrawing your consent from? And then release and listen, because my activism doesn't have to look, your activism doesn't have to look like my activism. That we all have a lane, we all have gifts and talents and abilities and genius to offer, but you have to listen. And when your spirit says, speak up, have the courage to say no. Have the courage to say, that does not stand here. Have the courage to extend compassion and forgiveness to someone who does not think like you, that has the polar opposite belief system, even though you don't understand how in the heck this person believes and thinks the way they do. They're feeling the same way about you. So have that compassion, that acceptance, that understanding. Acceptance doesn't mean consent. Acceptance means I hear you. And that's really all we want, right? To be heard, to be seen, to be understood. So breathe. And so I'm just settling in, holding the space of peace, that I feel the peace in my belly. I feel the peace in my heart. I feel the stillness in my thoughts, the harmony. And I'm so grateful to be in this unified field with each and every one of you, knowing that we are engaging in the God of our understanding, that we are more than the sum of our parts, and that this ripple and this wave of love and acceptance and heart energy, love energy, we all get to share this. We get to shine it. And so it's from this place of sacred union and unity with my dear brother and sister now that I speak a word of blessing on the collective, that we are definitely on our healing journeys. And we say yes to healing right now. We say yes to peace right now. We say yes to understanding right now. We say yes to inspired action right now. Right now. And in all the ways that we are connected and we communicate, that we utilize them to the utmost effect to build a kind and just global society. And that's something to say yes to. And so I release this prayer and place it on the altar of the Most High that takes care of the how, so we don't have to. We just got to be clear about this why. And we take full advantage of the when it shows up. So I release this prayer into the powerful energy of God's love that only and always says yes. And I let it be. And so it is. Ashe.
Oh,
Amen. Mm.
thank you, Lettie. What a delight to be with you today. Thank you for gracing us with your beauty and your wisdom, your love. Can feel your love so deeply. Many blessings on your path.
Yeah. And so I want to make sure those people who want to keep connected and supporting you like we do know that the best website is which one for you, so they can just keep track of your...
Well, I think the catch-all website is lettiesullivan.com, Lettie Sullivan.com. And I have a beautiful online community on Mighty Networks. And so that is at thegoddessministry.com. So you can be with me. I do morning prayer every morning, 7 days a week, 365 for 20 minutes. Drop in. We do vagal breathing and diaphragmatic breathing to condition our nervous system so that we can not have that trauma response be on such a hair trigger. Yeah. We do meditation. I do an inspired reading, a new book each month, and prayer. So
beautiful.
That's available for free every day. And then I have other paid offerings, and I'm on Instagram at Goddess Ministry and actually across all social platforms as at Goddess Ministry.
Goddess
Indeed.
Ministry.
Beautiful.
Hi, Kitty.
Thank you. We look forward to more. She's telling us it's time.
She says it's time.